hard to get to programs, and I truly appreciate you seeing you out in the crowd. But my name is Patty Arteaga. I'm the Public Programs Manager for the Smithsonian's Our Shared Future, Reckoning with Our Racial Past. It's an initiative that oversees this particular program series called the National Conversation on Race. I hope you know that that's what you are here for. But it is my completely and absolute pleasure to welcome you to the particular National Conversation on Race in San Antonio. Can we have a round of applause? And I'm usually behind the scenes and observe in the sidelines, but as you may well know, our panelists are our actual collaborators today, our 6 collaborators that we've been working on this past year almost on what and conceptualizing what this program would be. It really is born out of them. This is a collaboration from them, and all of the rest of the 11 days you get to see these organizations, museums and cultural organizations at their best. And I want to give them a shout out here. So those collaborators are American Indians in Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions, Asian Texans for Justice, the Museum, I saw Meredith, Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, the San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum. They brought an entourage over here. And last but not least, the Whitties. Thank you. So today is just a kickoff of what the next 11 days of programming will be, and of course it's brought on by our collaborators. They have put a completely fantastic program, and before we get started and to ground us, I invite Ramon Diego up to the stage. Applause, yes.
Thank you, Patty. Nalatam, everyone. Chumanam, now it's the evening time. My name is Ramon D. Vasquez. I'm a member of the Tepilam Coiteca Nation, the Atacapaguama tribe. My people have been here for many, many generations, and it's good for us to be able to have the opportunity to kind of open things up for this space and this conversation on race, especially here in San Antonio. I'm just going to kind of open things up by just offering this acknowledgement that this place and space that we're on today, you know, for many of us, we know as San Antonio, to the many different tribes and Aboriginal communities that are born from the lands here, we know this place as Yanawana, or in the Bahla language means land of the spirit waters. And so we honor those relatives that call this place home for many, many generations. And in creation stories, call this the homeland, you know, the place where the people were born. And so there are many, many Aboriginal tribes to this area. And so some of them go by the Spanish term Coitecan. There are many other Aboriginal tribes that originate from this area, like the Estokna people. We acknowledge those relatives as well. We also acknowledge the Karankawa folks of the coast and also the Tankawa people in this region. And there are many, many other Aboriginal tribes that have roamed this area of what some folks would call Somisek, which is the state of Texas all around. So we want to acknowledge and honor all of those relatives as well. This place also became homelands to other tribal nations that made their way either forcibly or by way of migration to these lands. It's like the Lipan Apache people who also call this place home as well in later times, and the Comanche, Kiowa, Caddo, and other relatives that have called this place homeland as well. So we acknowledge those relatives. But today, this land is also homeland now to roughly about 65,000 Native identified people in this area of Bexar County. And so we want to honor all of those relatives that call this place home too, because they bring their ancestors with them. This area in space that some of us know as Somisek, like the Estokna people say, just now, in today's time, about almost 800,000 Native identified people across the entire state. So honor all of those relatives as well in this place and space, especially as we get into this heavy and heated conversation. Hopefully it doesn't get too heated, but so we kind of make way for our ancestors and relatives to kind of be here with us. As I do this, I'm also a culture bearer of many traditions that were passed on to me by my father and other elders. My grandfather passed things on to myself as well, and other siblings of mine and relatives in our community and our tribe. And so in these ways, I also offer a quick, what we call an invocation. It's a quick song, that kind of invokes the spirit, And in that way, it's my invitation to our relatives, our ancestors, those people that called this place home for many, many years, to come join us, in this place and space. And so I call on those ancestors of mine. But it's also an invitation to you all to call in those ancestors of yours as well, to be in this place with you. It's always taught to us, too, that there's never truly an empty seat, amongst people. This is where spirit comes in and takes seat for us, those ancestors that carry this medicine and these teachings when we're having difficult conversations and strong, powerful, and courageous conversations. They show up for us. And so when we do this invocation, we acknowledge all of those relatives that come in that way too. So mine, yours, and all of those old ones and some of those new ones, So I invite you, as I share in this song, to think about those relatives, think about those ancestors, have them here with you today, to have some good conversation, good dialogue. So again, I say nalet sam to everybody for the opportunity. So appreciate you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you, Ramon. And it's great, absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage the San Antonio Mayor, Ron Nirenberg. I think he's backstage.
Good evening. So first, I hope you are as proud of your city today with the Smithsonian here as I am. I think it's very significant because it's a pleasure to support efforts that enhance our understanding of the impact that race has on our lives and to continue the march toward justice. This is the history of San Antonio, and it is also certainly the future of our city. Tonight's San Antonio version of the national conversation on race is an important opportunity to consider the key issues surrounding race in America. And as you all know, it's a very important time for these conversations. We're on the cusp of a new presidential administration that rose to power using racially charged rhetoric and promoting divisiveness. Those are facts that we cannot debate. And the president-elect supports policies that will reverse historic gains in civil and human rights. Those are also facts that are not debatable. Institutional racism continues to plague our society, and our efforts to eliminate the quiet discrimination are being attacked by policymakers and politically motivated judges. So it's safe to say that turbulence is ahead. But we must not forget that the battles of the civil rights era were extraordinarily difficult. Looking back, it's impossible not to be in awe of the determination of the African Americans and many others who confronted white supremacy with voter registration drives, demonstrations, and sit-ins to access their basic human rights. Unfortunately, here we are, some 60 years after the movement that opened the doors of opportunity to so many, and it is still accurate to say we have come a long way, but the struggle is not over. And now we want to hide the truth about our nation's past by not teaching Black history in schools. Obviously, much work needs to be done. Tonight's conversation is part of an ongoing vigilance that is required from all of us. We will continue to push our nation forward and resist efforts to erase progress on equality and a host of other issues. The courage of average African Americans and their refusal to accept the inequality of desegregation remains inspirational for all who share the desire to achieve true social justice in our nation. We must be as courageous and strong as the marchers and lunch counter demonstrators of the 1960s. That is what is required of us. We must and we will continue pushing for progress and justice because that is the San Antonio way. And if I may, just leave you with one of the most important adages that we can keep in mind as we move forward over the next several months and years. The arc of the moral justice is long, but it is bent towards justice. God bless you all. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. I would like now to invite Dr. Deborah Mack up to the stage. I'm looking for her. Oh, she's backstage. That would make sense. She is our initiatives director.
Thank you, and welcome again for some of you who were with us earlier this evening. And I want to thank your mayor as well for speaking truth to power, for reminding us that there are multiple generations who have made a way out of no way, and that we have to continue that work. I, as the director of the Smithsonian's initiative, Reckoning with Our Racial Past, we have a small team here, we are a larger team, and we really are working our way across the nation, starting with some of our strongest collaborators early on here, as in San Antonio, to listen and to learn, because much of the activism, much of the hard work, much of the multi-generational work that's required to do this is exemplified here in San Antonio. We received support to begin this work beginning in 2022 through a generous endowment from Bank of America, and we've collaborated to date with three other cities. We've started in our Smithsonian hometown of Washington, D.C. We were also in Los Angeles and Chicago, but San Antonio is our largest collaboration, and we hope to enlarge it again in the future. San Antonio is amazing. The 6 museums and cultural organizations that we're featuring here, that we are highlighting at this time, are not only just some of the representations of San Antonio, but they're a glimpse of what a city and its people working collaboratively across neighborhoods, across languages, across cultures can bring about. San Antonio is really an exemplar in that work, and we hope to really share what we are finding here with other cities, other rural communities across the nation actually, and beyond. We'd like to extend our thanks to the collaborating institutions who did all the work for these next 2 weeks. We just provided some sponsorship, but the programs that you will see, they have created the ideas, they've developed them, they are executing them, they've done all the logistics. We're here to learn and to listen and to be thankful for everything that we're going to be seeing, but especially for tonight, which has just been fabulous to date. The conversation on race is really an embodiment of this kind of collaboration and dedication that you have demonstrated across San Antonio's communities. Our Secretary of the Smithsonian, Lonnie Bunch, is not able to be here with us tonight. He's actually on international travel. But with that, I'd like to share at this time a video message from Secretary Bunch for San Antonio.
Good evening to everyone in San Antonio. I'm Lonnie Bunch, Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. Welcome to the National Conversation on Race, part of the Smithsonian's Our Shared Future, Reckoning with Our Racial Past initiative. I'm sorry that I couldn't join you in person. I've long said that cultural institutions can and should use our resources and knowledge to make our nation better. This initiative is a catalyst for the kinds of conversations needed for that to happen. By grappling with the complicated history and legacy of race and racism, hopefully we can achieve a more just, more equitable society. But as my dad used to tell me, no one has a monopoly on wisdom. The Smithsonian needed to reach out and enlist help on this ambitious project. So the initiative convened 6 extraordinary San Antonio museums and community-based cultural organizations: American Indians in Texas at the Spanish colonial missions, Asian Texans for Justice, the Dezuma and the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, the San Antonio African American Community and Archives Museum, and the Whitty Museum. Regional cultural institutions and museums like these are vital to examining the national legacies of race and racism. By using our valued educational resources and expertise, we can help all Americans understand and define understanding. Today, and for the next 2 weeks, the incredible talent and dedication of these organizations will be on display. Together, by listening to our communities, I am confident they will develop programs that truly make a difference. The history of race in San Antonio, as it is everywhere, is nuanced, complicated, and often difficult. It is both about tragedy and triumph, about pain and joy, but it's also about resiliency. To heal the nation, to help us live up to its highest ideals in the present and in the future, means grappling with our unvarnished past. The National Conversation on Race is a tremendous opportunity to do so. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of this important event.
Thank you all.
And one small correction, our secretary meant the museum. Just wanted to clarify that. And to introduce our next guest, if I can have Carla come to the stage.
Good evening, relatives. We are so pleased to have you all here today, here in San Antonio, for those that are visiting from out of town, and for those of you that are here, that reside here. We thank you for being a part of today's conversation over the next 2 weeks. Here in San Antonio, we find that culture heals, que la cultura cura, and we operate that way as much as possible. And this evening, we're going to continue beginning our evening with some of the lyrical medicine from Azul, Barrientos. Your applause, please.
Sí, ahí estamos. Buenas noches. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here tonight. And I decided to write a song tonight because it's an important night. And as I was dancing around with lyrics, I went to that space when we can all be children and be playful and even though as adults sometimes it can be difficult to go to those spaces, to those utopic spaces where really we are all one, where we all love and respect one another, not only us humans, but also nature, Mother Earth, the birds, the water. And this song is inspired in that. And also, I decided to do it bilingual, so we'll see how that English part goes. And I want to do it with my instrument jarana. This kind of instruments, jaranas, charangos, they were born out of survival. When the Spanish came to Americas, the native people were not allowed to even play and let alone have a guitar. But native people, mestizo people, started to be very interested in these string instruments, so they decided to create their own, and they have survived. So here's the jarana segunda and this song that calls for a brand new day.
Yo llevo en la sangre huella de muchas noches oscuras. Desprecio, guerras y ofensas borraron hasta mi lengua, mas también llevo estrellas, los sueños de mis abuelas que sembraron en la tierra mi ombligo, testigo y huella. En manos por un nuevo amanecer, unidos sin miedo alguno por un nuevo amanecer, un latido, una vida por un nuevo amanecer, la tierra la única guía por un nuevo amanecer, que el odio quede en cenizas en un nuevo amanecer. Viento, llévate este rezo a un nuevo amanecer. I carry in my blood the trance of conquest's darkest nights, words that silenced ancient voices, stripped away my mother tongue. But I also carry stars, the dreams of my grandmothers, their seeds deep in the earth, my naval witness and trace, with a heart in our hands, for a brand new day. Together we stand in a brand new day. One heartbeat, one life in a brand new day. The earth our only guide in a brand new day. Hatred burned to ash in a brand new day. Wind carry this prayer to a brand new day. Wind carry this prayer to a brand new day. To a brand new day. To a brand new day.
I've never heard of Azul, and everyone who found out that she was going to play tonight told me you're in for a treat. And wow, they were not wrong. I'm trying to hold my emotions. That was really beautiful. But no, that was great. And so now I want to turn it to our conversation. I'm going to run through bios and then invite folks to come towards the stage after I go through the bios. I'm seeing nods. So very quickly, we chose San Antonio, as Deborah Mack mentioned, because of its renowned and diverse population, its cultural rich history and vibrant celebrations, but it's also a place of contested narratives and histories. And what we've been seeing, right, with local museums and cultural organizations are a response to that in their own ways and manifestations, in the way culture can bring people together. And so with that, I am going to go through bios now. So today's panel facilitator and moderator is Dr. Eric Castillo, a second-generation Chicano from Yanaguana, San Antonio, Texas, and is a social justice practitioner and scholar. He serves as Associate Vice Chancellor of Arts, Culture, and Community Impact for the Alamo Community Colleges District. Through his office, he co-facilitates healing circles and transformation programs, along with various community-based projects such as First Peoples Project, the West Side Black History Project, and Compassionate USA. Dr. Castillo received his PhD in American Studies from the University of New Mexico, and most recently held a racial healing practitioner fellowship with the National Compadres Network. So he's gonna be a great moderator. Our featured panelists, and I have a slideshow for this. It's Michelle Cuellar Everidge, is the Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer at the Whitty Museum, which she charts a path for future through strategic and interpretive planning, visitor experience, and community engagement. She is a project director for public history projects focused on telling untold stories of Texas. Dr. Everidge is committed to building an inclusive future for museums across the country and is proud to collaborate with the National Museum of the American Latino and the Texas Association of Museums, where she serves on the executive committee. She received her PhD in history from the University of Delaware. Ramon Vasquez was born in San Antonio and is an enrolled member of the Tapilam Coahuiltecan Nation. He is the executive director of the American Indians in Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions, a 501c3 nonprofit that serves the indigenous population of Central and South Texas. Ramon has served as the mayor's appointed chairman for the Violence Prevention and Recidivism Reduction Committee, the mayor's task force on police and community relations, and since 2014, he has also served as the mayor's appointee for the City of San Antonio Alamo Citizens Advisory Committee. It's very impressive. Nicolette Ardiente, originally from New York, New Jersey area. She is now officially a proud Texan since 2012. Where are you? There you are. A daughter of immigrants, Nicolette is an activist, organizer, and advocate. Fueled by serving the community, her current role is a community engagement manager for Asian Texans for Justice, where she amplifies Asian American and Pacific Islander, or AAPI, Texan voices alongside many other community advocates and leaders. Deborah Omawale Jarman is a retired civil servant from the 27-year career in the world of air traffic control. I was surprised, thank you. Deborah relocated to San Antonio to be close by grandmother and even opened a bed and breakfast in San Antonio. She has now turned to community advocacy with a mission to connect the African American community to each other and to many opportunities. She is the CEO and director of the San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum, and a board member of the Classic Theater, and serves on San Antonio's Airport Advisory Commission. Graciela Isabel Sanchez follows in the footsteps of strong neighborhood women of color and cultural workers and activists of San Antonio. As a buena gente of the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, a community-based cultural, arts, and social justice organization, Graciela works with people and community to develop programs that culturally ground working class and poor people, people of color, queer people, and women, individuals who are survivors of cultural genocide. She leads the vision and operations of Esperanza as a community center, art exhibition, and performance space, and a network facilitator for social justice, environmental, and community-based arts organization. And our last but not least, Chris Navarro from the Museum. And Chris is a graduate of Texas State University with a master's in theater arts. He's a certified teacher with experience teaching K-12 theater arts, ELAR, and digital communication. He's a teacher consultant for the National Writing Project, Central Texas Site, another graduate of the National Association of Latino Arts and Cultural Leadership Institute. He's a director of school and communications programs at the Museum, overseeing outreach to schools and community centers, educating, continuing the professional and collaborative programs with community partners. We did it. I would like to invite everyone, all the panelists and moderator, up to the stage. And
I feel so far away. Let me scoot closer to my friends here. All right, well, good evening, everybody. It's so good to be in community with each of you today, especially with these phenomenal people who I've had the opportunity to know for quite a bit. Some I've just got recently to meet as well. And so we are here to have conversation, here to open up storytelling, here to invite all of us in with an open heart and an open mind to connect the head and heart in the work that we do. We had a mayor who gave some really wonderful remarks about the city of San Antonio, and also some very piercing truth about our nation's current moment as well. And so I hope that this panel will also take the opportunity to take a piercing look at our city as well. You know, we have remarkable stories here in San Antonio, Yanaguana, and we also have stories that we don't always talk about. And so today will be the opportunity for us to shore up a lot of important information today. And so, as you saw, the title of this conversation is Bridging Divides, Race, Education, and Storytelling in San Antonio's Communities. So we're hoping that our conversation today will shift the narrative a bit, from misrepresentation and false narratives to truth, healing, and transformation, from disconnection and isolation to connection and community, and from division and despair to narratives that honor our differences and celebrate our common humanity, narratives that give us hope. So we're going to frame we have 4 questions today, so we're going to frame it around 4 particular areas. One is going to be on legacy and histories in San Antonio, race and racism's subtle and overt presence in our city, our individual organizational interventions in dismantling racial inequities, and our collective commitment to solidarity, storytelling, and social change. So thank you all for being here and sharing space today. So let's just get started, folks. First question. What are some, the first is a couple questions kind of put together. You can take and chew on whatever you want to talk about, okay? So what are some of our key stories here in San Antonio's history? Things that we all know and think about when you hear San Antonio, this is like, oh, this is what we know about San Antonio history. This is very San Antonio. What is the narrative of our city? And who is the narrative for? Who is upholding these narratives, and who are the architects of these stories?
Thank you for the question and the conversation to the Smithsonian. I think so what resonates with me, it is what has been the story, and for San Antonio. And obviously, I run the American Indians in Texas, and since the work we've been doing for 40 years now, prior to us coming to the scene and bringing this awareness about the American Indian contributions historically and contemporarily. The story here in San Antonio was that when the Spanish arrived, they were greeted by mariachis, totally disregarding the 10,000-year history of a people who occupied this land. And that has been the narrative that, that people that come to San Antonio would leave with. And I think that it's because of that that we have to continue to change these narratives and partner and do the work that we're doing. But that's one of the big ones that I think for me.
You forgot that they were pot-bellied mariachi and the singing senoritas.
Yeah.
I love this group. We've been together for a year, and it's been a lot of fun. I think one of the things for me as an African descendant, the narrative is that we're not here and that we were never here, when indeed, and we're working this out closely with AITSC, and we've been here since the 1500s, at least, when we came as enslaved with the Spanish to help them scout, navigate, translate for the indigenous Aboriginal people that were here. So we've been here. And I think another story, when you talk about the Canary Islanders, well, who were the Canary Islanders? Well, the Canary Islands are 63 miles off the west coast of Africa. They have indigenous blood. Most of their blood is indigenous. But there's also European, Berber, and sub-Saharan African blood. So this narrative that African descendants weren't here is troublesome. And I know Graciela has something else to say besides potbelly.
What resonates in your question with me is who controls the narrative. And a lot of our attention at the museum is on our colleagues in public schools. So when I think about the stories that you're sharing that are the stereotypical narratives that you might hear in a Texas history class, that's a lot of our focus at the museum has been on the trends within schools. I come from a public school background, and for me, the story is one of the narrative changing and schools becoming more inclusive through the late 20th century. I like to say I started my career in the late 20th century. But we're seeing now a pushback to that progress. I love this group too, and part of what I find inspiring about this project and the group is that these resources exist within the city to push back against the trends that are trying to control that narrative again within our public schools.
Please, there's just so much. Well, I mean, I think for, again, school children and for visitors and for, community, I mean, the Alamo is right there, front and center, and it is the conquest, or it is, the bad Mexicans, the smelly, ugly, greasy-looking Mexicans who basically kill our poor, beautiful Alamo defenders, right? And that's the narrative that
Alamo heroes. They call them heroes. Oh. We call them defenders. They call them heroes.
Heroes. Yeah, that's been a story for 150 years or so, and it's what's being shared always, every day in classrooms. I remember once, driving my car and hearing, seventh graders, Texas history, right, writing poems during Fiesta Week, and it was on radio, and they were saying horrible things about the Mexicans. And it's like, this was just like 10, 15 years ago. So this is what we're teaching, but this is what we're also listening to. and continuing to perpetuate. That's on one side. I think, if you talk to Lori Houston, our assistant city manager, she tells developers from throughout the country, and especially in Texas, this is cheap labor city, right? Come to San Antonio, it's cheap labor. And who's the cheap labor? It's brown and black and Asian and Native communities, right? Because we are cheap labor, and we will continue to be cheap labor because that's what developers want, and that's what we continue to push. And we want our workers to be docile, right? So why do we even need an educated, critical thinking group of people? Why do we need them to go to college when all we really want them to do is continue to work at our tourist-based economy? So we need to make sure to scare them and threaten them and fire them and make them work, 2 and 3 and 4 jobs, who then are fatigued and have mental crisis and barely, are surviving. So I don't know. There's a lot there. Now your turn.
Thank you. You highlighted some things that I've been thinking about as historical elements. This idea of a San Antonio tourist economy that overlays the truth of the violence of what is happening in our communities and has. And I think that's what I find so remarkable, in that we should remark upon it, that it's hundreds of years of this kind of storytelling that paints our city as this romantic, imaginary, vibrant cultural hub, but that on the underbelly, and not really even the underbelly, in the real life, the daily life of the people who live here, is fraught with these issues and has been for a century or more, much more. And so this conflict that we have between what our city can present to the world and what really propels our city's economy and the tourist industry, but erases the labor of the people who work in that industry and erases these stories of violence and displacement that have happened throughout our history. So just thinking about what's still happening today through a historical lens, it's remarkable to see how similar those hard facts are.
But even on top of that, and to add on to Dr. Everidge, is that the stories that we do hear, I can only imagine, what are the stories we have not heard? What are the gruesome, trials and tribulations of different ethnic communities that have not been shared? I would be remiss with Ms. Deborah over here that, there was a lot of invisibility with our communities. I think of particularly the Asian immigrant community that first came over 1890s, right? The idea they came from California and New York because they saw opportunities with the railroad. They saw opportunities with agricultural industries that, again, cheap labor, like Ms. Graciela said. But we never hear those stories until it's too late, or perhaps we need a diversity look, or we need this this rough, edgy appeal to what makes San Antonio really rich. It's, again, because of the backs of black and brown laborers.
Well, I remember for at least the Chinese coming down, coming up through with Pershing, they were just opium smoking, again, lazy folks that hung out at the Menger. That's just really bad, but rather than who they really truly are. So.
And even how the city frames history, Dr. Everidge, you mentioned, he said looking back hundreds of years, and the city stops there. The city stops looking at history just a couple hundred years, 300 years. When we know that there are decades and centuries that go further back beyond just hundreds of years, and so how we choose to frame the story of San Antonio, Yanaguana, is the first problem there. Because we say this is where it begins, and we neglect every single history that's represented here. And then what are the popular markers that we see in the city? It's military city, mission city, mariachi city. So these 3 M's are what frame the popular imagination for our city. And why? Because it's palatable. You know, we can talk about military connected and veteran because it's palatable. It's easier to talk about. You know, that's more of like a universal. We can talk about mariachi because it's food, fun, fiesta. We can talk about missions because it's related to faith. But we don't look at the underbelly. We don't dive deep into that historical record that challenges the city's narrative.
Well, I just want to add to that too, because I think everything that you're saying also is by design, right? San Antonio was built on racism. It started with shaming American Indians and continued. We have the #1 symbol of white supremacy in the world in our downtown, the Alamo. And we'll spend $500 million to perpetuate a narrative that resulted in discrimination and racism. And we have to speak louder, right? Because we have to push back and we have to challenge this. And I think it's so easy to do because so many people's identity are attached to these histories that are not people of color. And they push back hard for these narratives. And that's why I think it's so important that conversations like this continue to happen, and that we have to continue to push back and challenge, the regurgitation of history, a one-sided history. So we can't forget that it's by design.
I just have one additional thing to add about who controls the narrative. The dollar controls the narrative. It's the economy. We're all, more or less, other than the Whitty and Museum, grassroots organizations. And so what you're looking at is a group of cultural institutions that have said, maybe we don't need everyone's dollar to be successful, because we don't want that dollar to then control our narrative. I think the Whitty and the Museum are past that point, which is a good thing for partnership. But for AIT, Asian Texans, and Esperanza and SACAM, we have had to say, no, we don't want your money because we don't want you to have to tell us what story to tell. So we really need the support of all of you all out there. Okay, there's no shame in this
Giving
club.
Tuesday.
As it is Giving Tuesday, correct.
Where's the QR code? Absolutely. And that's important, a conversation to start to have, is understanding like what controls. It's not just who, but what. We live in a class and caste system here that continues to perpetuate ideologies that reifies images of racism and iconography that Graciela just mentioned earlier. And so there is a requirement and necessity of survival and resilience to push back against the dollar and find other ways of identifying wealth and abundance. So that dollars are not the only way we can create change. And so it is solidarity networks, it is communities coming together that will help us shore up what is needed for us. That kind of, I don't like to use the word capital, that kind of like abundance of wealth that we can turn to create things. And so I appreciate that you named that for us today. And so I wanna shift us to now the second piece, which is about race and racism. So like wanting to ask us to even underscore and highlight these things in our community as well. So what you've just talked about, how do these stories and images speak to our racialized legacies in San Antonio? Does our city have an honest account of racial violence and racial terror and disenfranchisement? Where are those historical records? Where are the records of that happening right now to this date? Have we reckoned with our racial past as a city?
Are you kidding?
We gotta name it. We gotta name it,
No, we have not. And if we had, we wouldn't perhaps need to have this conversation or even this panel. We have so much work to do. Again, the Alamo is a testament that no, we haven't reckoned with our racial past. Even when you think about the military, and I think about what happened in our city where black soldiers were hung without due process. They were buried, well, actually they were hung on the 15th hole tee box of where now people play golf at Fort Sam. So that was 100 years ago, yes, but what has really changed? We haven't reckoned with that. We have streets named after slave owners. So the statues are gone, but the street names are still there. So no, we haven't reckoned with it.
We haven't, but I feel we're in the reckoning right now. I feel like this conversation, the work that I've learned about that you are doing, the work we're doing at the Museum, this is the moment. I think that's where the pushback is coming as well. Our move from downtown illustrates to me this not reckoning and the opportunity that we have and is happening. In our downtown location, we were the San Antonio Children's Museum. I had an experience there before we moved. Two things happened to me right before we moved with guests that just informed our need to listen closely to the public and make the public a part of the design of the new museum. And this was felt and supported by our staff as we moved. We had a pioneer playhouse in the original San Antonio Children's Museum. There was an image in that museum of a black family, a black woman with white children around her. A black family was visiting the museum, and the mother of this family felt compelled to tell me about the experience that her children had, because they got into a bit of an argument because the woman in the picture was smiling and it looked like a sort of happy scene from that era of time. It was from the 1800s. And it took some convincing from the mom to help the child understand the context of the image. And what she wanted us to understand was that without the context, she understood, that maybe it was part of the history, but we weren't really telling the accurate story. And that moment resonated with me as we moved into the new location and understanding that part of our responsibility with the level of resources that we are privileged to have is to listen closely to our community and ensure that we're representative of who San Antonio truly is.
For us with the Mission Indian community, our people were written off in 1920s as biologically and culturally extinct. So they didn't have a need to reconcile with their past or the atrocities that took place associated with the mission. They just institutionalized it in academia and produced scholars that continued to perpetuate that same belief of culturally and biologically extinct, forcing our people to work towards reversing extinction. And I don't know too many races of people that have had to work towards reversing their extinction. But it seems like that's what we've had to do here. So, violence happens in many different ways with the stroke of a pen as well. And when you try to physically erase, a culture of a people from a physical location like San Antonio, that's cultural genocide. And we've had to reckon with that even in 2024. And the last thing that I want to say in regards to this question is, when you ask that question about that race and violence, all you have to think back is to the George Floyd protest that happened here in San Antonio and the image that was put in the newspaper the next day that showed the white militia armed with AK-47s with machine guns, standing in front of the Alamo around the cenotaph, being surrounded by San Antonio's police department in riot gear, and then the next group of people were unarmed protesters. That vision says it all in regards to where we're at right now. And that picture, we made national news. So that's what people know of San Antonio when they see that.
What a striking image of what the city wants to protect. You know, the willingness to stand guard for militia, to protect around the Alamo.
An armed militia.
Armed militia. Like that sings to me, and it pierces in a certain way. I hope that you all heard so clearly what everyone was mentioning, because that is so clear that we have not at all reckoned, and that we are still so far entrenched in a $500 million project to protect it that much, they're going to put riot gear and armed people around an image, a building.
Yeah, I wanted to, just kind of present it, that the city, maybe the whole country, maybe the world, but that we have a culture of violence, right? When you think of the 5 missions, right? What were they there for? They were there, again, to colonize indigenous people, right? It was about, rape. It was about torture. It was about, cutting people's tongues out because they were speaking different language. You got to speak this language. And it's still the same, right? We've seen only now, it's English, right? And after the 5 missions, we have the 5 military bases in the 20th century. And again, this pride of military USA, why? I mean, what does the military do? It's about war, it's about violence, it's about murder, it's about bombing, it's about killing innocent people of color throughout the world. And for us, it's like, this is what we're proud of. Well, it's the way to become middle class, So we say, everybody that worked at Kelly, it's like, and when Kelly closed, it's true, 40% of all Mexican Americans that worked in the military in the US lost their job because of how big Kelly was. But is that the way to move up in the world, in the US, in San Antonio? It allows us to continue to perpetuate that violence in all the wars that are happening today, right? It allows Professor Advocate at St. Mary's University to be invited by, which was President Bush, for his support of torture. It allows for the Don't Ask, Don't Tell laws that also came out from St. Mary's University. It allows for, the teaching of the torture that goes into Latin America, Asia, Africa, because we're training them here, right? I've been at the airport and all these small little brown Latinos that are, it's like, what are they doing? They look like they've been at Lackland Air Force Base. This is not a good thing for us to be proud of, this culture of violence that's, again, it's very racist, and it affects not only our folks here, but also people throughout the world.
I think that's there's something so specific about the word reckoning too, right? It's this idea, when you envision the word reckoning, you're like pummeling through something, you're trying to break through. It is a violent, almost illusion that you could put it upon yourself. And if we come back to the question, has our city really reckoned with its past? I don't believe so. I'd like to be idealistic and think that we're in a moment now and we can create that movement, but it doesn't take only us. It takes all of y'all also in the audience to be a part of these initiatives. I think as well, when we talk about the military, and as much as we glamorize and we do pride our military, I'd be remiss if I didn't share that, Fort Sam Houston here used to be an incarceration camp during World War II, where not only Japanese, but also Japanese Americans were incarcerated as a temporary incarceration place. So it's this idea, yes, we can pride ourselves in our military city and how they fight for our rights, and at the same time, are we really understanding what the military is doing for San Antonio?
And I just want to make one more comment about us reckoning with our past. How many of you all are familiar with Fiesta? Okay. So if you go just to the Fiesta website, we'll start there, and you look at the mission of Fiesta, it says to honor the heroes of the Alamo. That's exactly what it says. Fiesta was started from the Battle of the Battle of the Flowers Parade. And then it grew into this 11-day celebration. So the Battle of the Flowers Parade celebrates the winning of the Battle of San Jacinto when Texas could be a republic. What's significant about the Republic of Texas for Black and brown people? One, the Constitution said we weren't citizens. We were not citizens of the Republic. It also said if you were a free African and you lived in the Republic, you had to leave. It also says that if you wanted to be free, even if your enslaver wanted to free you, it literally took an act of Congress. So my question is, if we really reckoned with our racial past, how is it that we can spend 11 days celebrating a thing that celebrates the Republic of Texas where Black and brown people were not even considered citizens?
But how many of our cultural centers and our museums celebrate and have their medals out there? I mean, Esperanza has 11 days of doing other work like resting maybe, because we don't celebrate it. And people get upset, right? Because we do challenge that. And again, part of the racist past of Fiesta was actually that the population of the Mexicanos was growing, white people being threatened, right? There were all these May Day celebrations going on, so it's like, okay, how can we counter that? And that's where the idea of celebrating the Alamo comes from, April 21st, right? Because that would again get ahead of the May Day celebrations the Mexicanos were having. And that I understand from George Cisneros, that part of one of the groups starting it were KKK members, with the Knights of blah, 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 as the organizing group. Sorry, just as a side.
So again, real quick, if our city reconciling or reckoning with its past, we wouldn't be the #1 city in the United States that's economically segregated. That again is by design. We wouldn't have Jim Crow leftovers in our city, keeping these communities in the state that they're in economically. Where else do you find 17 independent school districts across this country? That is by design. Those are all Jim Crow leftovers in our city, and nobody wants to touch that.
And I appreciate you pointing to also Ramon, the intellectual argument for slavery and racism and disenfranchisement, the way in which we had federal laws and state laws that were constructing, creating disenfranchisement and oppression, but also educational institutions, which were the legitimizing force, creating science, and research, demonstrating the need for a hierarchy of human value. And I want to mention what Nicolette said, and the pivot to the next question is you mentioned talking about reckoning being about force, and not violence. And it reminded me of a quote that I don't recall the author at the point, but it talks about how we confront violence but without being violent. How do we confront injustice without replicating injustice? And I think that's the work that these phenomenal people in these organizations are doing, is reckoning with that and pushing and confronting without replicating violence and disenfranchisement, not falling into the trap of an industrial complex that calls them, requires them to take dollars to continue showcasing certain ideas and exhibits, but they're actually doing work that reckons with what's happening in this city right now. And so, speaking of interventions, I'd love to hear about y'all's intervention with reckoning with our racial past and our contemporary moment as well. Could you all briefly talk about what you all are doing in your organizations that are confronting these injustices and that are edifying stories that are important and beautiful?
Our Uniquely Us exhibit, and I think that's where my mind is on, that we're currently reckoning, because it's been 2 years of design work with our team thinking about these issues globally, nationally, and of course here locally. So the exhibit was motivated by the events of 2020, the murder of George Floyd, the protests, and just the ugliness that came to pass in that year. The question for us was, does a children's museum have a role to play in this kind of conversation? And of course, we took that question very seriously because our primary audience is children. The question, when it was posed to me, was a clear yes. My 8-year-old at the time was asking me what was wrong with the police, what was happening to the police. There was a conversation that I was ready to have with him when he was older about how to behave around police officers. Having to explain to him at 8 years old was not something that I was expecting to have to do in my life, and the world had clearly changed a lot from what I thought was happening at the end of the 20th century. So our work on the Uniquely Us exhibit is about unpacking the racist history of our country and figuring out ways to present the science and the history of racism in a way that is accessible for families and kids to spark those conversations. So that's, for me, why I feel like this is the moment of reckoning. We are doing the work of unpacking these difficult issues and creating a safe space for these difficult conversations.
I think I'll add to that I want to feel hopeful that this is the moment of reckoning, and sometimes it's challenging to feel like incremental change is the best we can do. And so that's really what we are grappling with at the Whitty. We are a large organization. It takes us a while to move. It's like moving a cruise ship. You make a small adjustment and hope, and you make a small adjustment and hope. And thankfully, we have leaders in our community that press us for making those changes. And so for the last 5 years, we've been working on an idea to reimagine our history exhibition and to think about how we tell broader, more inclusive, more stories about Texas than we currently do, how we switch that narrative, and also how we remain flexible as history changes over time. So we have been hit with this idea that we are presenting revisionist history, but as a historian, we know that history changes just as fast as science does, that we always have new evidence, we have new storytellers, we have new stories, we have stories that we are bringing out of erasure, as best we can to show them to the light. And I think the challenge we have is to keep plodding forward, to keep listening, to keep an open mind as we try to respond empathetically and we try to move forward with our community rather than in any other way, right? That is really what we're facing as an institution and how we make those changes intentionally and thoughtfully.
I want to add something to what Michelle said, and then I'll talk about SACAM. I am grateful that the Whitty has Aranetta Pierce on their board. Where is Aranetta? If you don't know, she is a force to reckon with. And thank you, Michelle and team, for listening. And then they also, because we office at the Whitty, they get to hear from us as well. And I can be forceful, I think, sometimes. So thank you so much for being...
Really so.
Thank you so much. So what we're doing at SACAM, we're one of the newer organizations here with Asian Texans for Justice. We're making sure that stories of African descendants are collected, preserved, and shared. You cannot go to a library and find stories of African descendants here in San Antonio. So we are doing the work to put that together. It has always been who gets to write the story, who gets to write history, are the victors. And that has been the case here in San Antonio. So we're making great strides to change that. And what we're most excited about is bringing other people to the table, because our history is not in a vacuum. You can't talk about, again, that we came here in the 1500s without talking about the tribes that we interacted with. You can't talk about even San Antonio history without talking about that this was Spain before, then it was Mexico, and Germans came. So how can we even talk about history without telling the stories that are adjacent to it? And so at SACAM, we're working hard to make sure that it is through an African American lens, hear me, but it is an inclusive story, because we're not here by ourselves. And I think when we look at how do we reckon with our racial past, is taking the good, the bad, and the ugly, us having these conversations and understanding how we've all been here at some time together, and we've made strides. Black people just didn't live on the west side, on the east side. We lived on the west side, south side, north side. We were all over. We lived downtown. So we can't tell our story alone.
So at the American Indians in Texas, what we were doing, we started our archives to try to make it really easy for academia to find primary sources, kind of a one-stop Powhatan shop, you know, for them to not have an excuse anymore to write about our history if they want to. But we're also, we started our own press, so we're publishing our own documents and things like that. But I think what's most important, what the American Indians in Texas is doing, is we recognize that San Antonio right now is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States with an American Indian population per capita. So we know that San Antonio is becoming the home to more and more American Indians from across the country. So we need to help San Antonio be that city where that will help that community, right? So AIT is doing that. We're creating that home, that base. We're creating strategic partnerships throughout the state of Texas. So American Indians, this year we celebrated 30-year anniversary for American Indian Religious Freedom Act. This year we celebrated our 100-year anniversary for citizenship. This year, American Indians got their citizenship 100 years ago. And so it's trying to reckon with that history, you know, and have a place like San Antonio, whose history started with American Indian and whose future is bright with American Indian community. We need to make that a welcoming place, and that's what we're trying to do.
I do want to take a moment to say, again, we're using reckoning. We're using, what was the other I word? I just had a brain fart. Interventions, right? These are tough words that you may not think about, honestly, when you're in these types of social justice spaces. And when I think about intervention, I think all of us are interventions for our community right now. We're all stepping up to take up this space. We're all saying, hey, these are the stories that are meant to be heard in our communities. I think of, on behalf of Asian Texans for Justice, we stepped up, honestly, after the Georgia Atlanta spa shootings. We knew that our community was reeling, and we wanted to see how do we best represent our communities if we're not showing up for one another. And so when I think of intervention, I thought all of us were going to talk about our events as ways to intervene and really inject into San Antonio really what we're doing, the work we're doing, with the energy that we're doing it. I'd like to share that our event, if y'all are open, is December 14th. It's Asian American History in San Antonio. We're taking an opportunity to share with educators of all ages in San Antonio about the Asian American contributions to history and ways that they can tangibly teach it in their classrooms. We'll be highlighting different community members from the Filipino community, the Sikh community, the Indian community, the Muslim community, and more to come. But this idea of Asian American history being tangible for folks to use what, if y'all were able to see in the lobby, we have a resource map that looks essentially like an amusement theme park map. You can visit San Antonio's Asian American contributions to history any day you want. If you want to eat really amazing Chinese food, there's plenty of places on that map. If you want to visit, religious institutions that have been here for decades and really learn more about our community, they exist. And we want to show and highlight that opportunity for our educators to take that back to our classrooms, to teach our children, to honestly bring that type of joy to making sure that everybody in our community is being inclusive and invited to the table. So again, I thought that was an opportunity for us to talk about our events. So there you go.
I haven't gone yet. So can I, before you start talking about events, I just wanted to go to the place of, Esperanza will be turning 38 come January. Yeah, we survived. And I think after many years of trying to work on a lot of these social justice issues, we kept on seeing that, if there was a struggle around, the struggle around Applewhite in City Hall, or, just the millions of, concerns that there were, folks weren't showing up, or there are reasons folks weren't showing up, but part of it is all, even demonstrations against wars, right? San Francisco, New York, Chicago, thousands of people on the street. And if we were lucky, like 200 or 500 or even 1,000 people. And like, why, right? Why is that, again, why aren't we putting out folks? And in doing the work, I realized that our folks are hurting, are so damaged by the racism, by the sexism, the homo and transphobia, and classism, that, it's just enough to survive on a day-to-day basis. And so I kind of thought, the mere act of waking up each morning was an act threatened again, because that's prime real estate. Anything within that 3-mile radius that's being called the special entertainment district that we just read about last week, that's been planned for a long time. What is that doing? So we also have to not just be creating these spaces for oral histories and museums, but we have to be there and resist with the community, to say, stop tearing our neighborhoods down, stop gentrifying, change policies, and be at these meetings and get angry. So that's in addition to the work of the cultural work, which of course wipes everybody out. And Graciela seems to stand alone sometimes. It's like, but I think we all have to be present at these places because, sometimes again it threatens our funding, but to hell with that funding, as Deborah said earlier on, because we need to save our communities. We see it in Paris, we see it in San Francisco, we see it in Austin. Our people of color are pushed to the outskirts of cities or outside into new cities, right? And that can't happen in San Antonio. So that's what we're resisting still.
Absolutely. So this is phenomenal. As you can tell, that the Animo is just growing and growing. The fire's getting hotter and hotter here. And I want to pivot. Do we have time for a question or two? So for one question, but I want to say is if you have a question, please raise your hand for the mic. I want to mention what Deborah said. You mentioned that, who writes the history of the victor? And I hear that, and we know that. And also, folks, I think about the way in which how these organizations have taken a posture of victory and of abundance. And so they are claiming the victories of their cultures and traditions and communities as well. So yes, we know the victors have written those large meta-histories. And today, and for 38, for 30, for these many years this has been happening, we're seeing a posture of victory taking place on this stage today. So thank you all so much for your wisdom and time today. Do we have a question that we want to, one question? I see one hand right up front.
Oh, there's so much to say. I want to lift up all of you who are here, and with a special fondness, Ramon, Graciela, you guys have been here for a while, and I really appreciate your integrity of standing up and speaking truth to power. You do it repeatedly, and you're just tirelessly doing it. You have my whole respect. I have heard a few things. I've heard phrases such as, incremental changes. I wonder if that comes from a place of feeling, I guess, maybe some comfort. There's things that I see in everyday San Antonio from, we have 30% of our population low income. There's so many structures that are representative of white supremacy. At the Whitty, the building that's like Texas Rangers, the plaque is commemorating the Texas Rangers from 1936. I mean, that's at the era of widespread lynching by the Texas Rangers of black and brown people. I get to see that every day because I walk my dog there and I hate it. There's constant, just reminders, right? It's a white supremacist society we live in. I have a call to action for the rest of us, and I wish all organizations. I find that San Antonio is known to be a friendly place. We're very focused on family, right? And I think that part of our culture works against us because we behave as though we're amongst family when we are in the same circle as those who are making decisions, right, and are powerful. The Laurie Houstons, right? I was in a commission where Laurie Houston was, and she straight up said, "We don't do equity." I quit. So I quit that commission. I said, why am I here? I think we need to be much more forward, not nice because, we're in family, but we need to create a ruckus, right? Be confrontational. So I guess my question to you is, what's your next steps on if you take on this call to action to be more confrontational, to not do things incrementally, to push hard?
I can talk for a few of us, but I'll just say, so a few of us on this panel are actually working together now to develop a narrative change for San Antonio to provide alternative or more, through our lens, stories that have to do with specific locations in San Antonio. We're actually having our first meeting in January. So we don't know what that's going to look like yet, but we have committed with each other and to a few others to do this work. Because it needs to happen, nobody's going to do it for us. And it's not going to be very popular. It's not something that's been very welcoming. When an elder told me one time, you can never be in unity with whiteness because whiteness doesn't want you. Not white people, whiteness, right? There's a difference, because he told me that too. We can be in unity with white people, but you can't be in unity with whiteness. And that's what we have to overcome. And collectively, I'm looking forward to that work.
I also want to piggyback on what Ramon said. So our work at SACAM as a community archive and museum actually is an act of resistance. Getting up every day is an act of resistance. But when I think about the stories that we're collecting and the ability to share them, right now we've digitized about 63 collections. We have over 100,000 objects. Our archive team, they are in a, I'm going to say a sabbatical, but not because they've left. They're in a sabbatical in their office this month just to catch up on digitizing the work. There wouldn't be a need for an Esperanza, a SACAM, an AIT, SEM, if things were an equitable playing field. But our very existence is an act of resistance. What you don't see is how we show up at the Alamo Museum Planning Committee. And I thank Araneta, I thank Ramon for being in a space where they're not afraid to speak. And then I don't feel like I'm alone because I'm on the committee as well. So it is going to take all of us. We can't be the type of family that says what goes on here stays here. And as you talk about family, we need to blow the whistle. This is not right. I don't care who comes into town, Lieutenant Governor Dan, whatever. Yes, there's a $400 million, $500 million project. And at SACAM, we don't call it white supremacy, we call it white delusion. There is this mirror of delusion, of fairy tales. We need to do a counter narrative.
So the Uniquely Us exhibit, I want to say, is really like a culmination of work that the museum has been engaged in from grand opening. Given that we are a larger organization, a more privileged organization, we're there for all children. And if we are committed to being there for all children, it means we have to face the harsh realities of our city in order to make a safe space for kids. So we've really been facing those facts since we opened the doors of the museum and doing everything that we can to be responsive to the community and inclusive in every way that that word means for every child in the city. Uniquely Us is a moment that we took ownership of the issues of racism and building unity and used our wheelhouse of creating experiences for children based in play and inquiry to create a safe space to bring up these topics. The work that we are getting to do, thank you to the Smithsonian, is allowing us to work directly with 4 schools in the city that will go on a field trip, experience the exhibit, and do some work before and after. The reason that I would count that as a move of resistance right now is that those schools are very much threatened by the legislature and the TEA, possibly in their existence as schools. They're schools that are embracing social justice and equity as a part of their pedagogy and their philosophy. And so we've connected with them to provide a resource and support their empowering of children to be the next generation of people that brings their voices to the table and questions things. And we do that through inquiry and play. And it's something that we do all of the time, even outside of the Uniquely Us exhibit.
And I want to, go ahead, Graciela.
For the Esperanza, besides the other stuff that I mentioned, we're also trying to develop the Escuelita project, the idea of building our community, building more leaders with the understanding of what is white supremacy, who are the 17 white men that run the city, what is redlining or whatever, so that we're that it's not just Graciela and 10 other people, that it's 100 and it becomes 1,000. And, you know, then it's loud and louder, and then hopefully there are 11 of us that can be in city council and change what's going on at City Hall and at the state level and the national level as well, but starting very much at the community level.
I think just to lastly echo is that there's an aspect of advocacy in each one of our organizations, and we take it to wherever those places of power don't see our faces, don't hear our voices, don't listen to our stories. So we take our advocacy very seriously and show up. I mean, to Ms. Deborah's point, she's going to planning commission meetings. We've got young API students going to the State Board of Education demanding for Asian American Studies courses because they want to see themselves reflected in the history and in the books that they're learning. So at the end of the day, as much as we are all grassroots, we are some scrappy advocacy fighters for our communities.
Beautifully said. So thank you so much for the comment and question, and we want to wrap this conversation. I'm getting this movement here from Patty. Patty, would you like to wrap up, or do you want me to? Yeah, there you go.
So round of applause, please, for them. Thank you. So it's very evident that continuing conversations need to happen, and that's really the invitation for the next 11 days. And why we collaborate with museums and cultural organizations is that, really, when we hope that this is also an opportunity for you to see the folks on stage and to collaborate with them now and in the future. I'll wrap it up here. Please, if you have, please join us in the next events. There's our QR code. And also, we wouldn't be a museum and cultural organization if we didn't have an evaluation form. We want to hear from you. We only had time for one question, but there's more opportunities to type it out. Tell us what you thought. And what are the takeaways from this conversation? And now, if you wouldn't mind staying in your seat, I want to invite our final closeout, our Thibaut Gonzalez, to kind of lift us and, with his drumming, kind of take us to the next step. So, thank you all for coming.
All right, hello. Give it up for this panel right here, ladies and gentlemen, please. The word for today is pulling together. You know about that? We need to learn to pull together. We all know what's about to happen. We're not going to let it happen. You hear me? Do you hear me? Y'all don't hear me. The word for today is pulling together. You hear me? In Swahili, the word is Harambee. You know Harambee? Harambee means pulling together. You with me? Are you with me? Let's pull together. So when I say Harambee, you say Harambee. Harambee? Harambee. So we're reaching up, pulling the spirit of our ancestors into our hearts. Harambee. Harambee. Oh, yeah, that sounds good. So we're going to hold it right in there somewhere, right? Hold it real long as you can, okay? If you believe in pulling together, say Harambee. 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 If you believe in pulling together, say Harambee. 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 Harambee.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's where the beat is at. Got it? If you believe in pulling together, say Harambee. 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 If you believe in pulling together, say Harambee. 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 You ready? If you believe in pulling together, say Harambee. 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 If you believe in pulling together, say Harambee. 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 Hey. Harambee. All right. If you believe in pulling together, say Harambee. 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 If you believe in pulling together, say Harambee. 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 One, two, ready, and Harambee. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right.